This is, and I'm really pleased, this is the first John MacLeod Lecture in the new Hilltop Home of Gardening Science. And I really appreciate you all coming during the challenges that we've all faced during COVID-19, but it is lovely to see and lovely to have a conference with people where we can talk about some of the serious issues that we need to deal with and look at. And without any doubt, water resilience and water is a critical aspect of everything that gardeners and the horticultural and landscape industry are involved in for its survivorship and for us to thrive, which links to having gardening and doing gardens, gardening and gardeners, and those that just have a place to garden, those environmental and health benefits that both those provide, which again, with 3 million plus more gardeners coming on board during COVID lockdown, has shown how important gardening has been as a vehicle for a coping mechanism regarding the mental well-being of our whole country. So I'm going to introduce you to Ian Holman, who I've known for probably about 14 years, and he worked with me originally at Eden Project, looking at the water balances of the Eden Project itself. Ian is a Professor of Integrated Land and Water Management at Cranfield University, and he leads the catchment management community of practice within Cranfield Water Science Institute. And from a PhD in groundwater, working on soil survey and land research in the Soil Survey and Land Research Centre, over the past 25 years, he's looked at an interdisciplinary perspective on sustainable land and water resources, particularly around sustainable land change impacts, climate change impacts, adaptation in the UK, Europe, but also internationally. So he was just mentioning today that when it was sort of near ground zero for water in South Africa, he was linked to that. He was a review editor of a Europe and Central Asia Regional Assessment for the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, and Reuters recently named him in the list of world top climate change scientists. Over the past 3 years, I've had the great pleasure to work with both Ian and Jerry Knox, alongside who Janet Manning is now finished, and Mark Gush, who is in the room here, on looking at how we can use a knowledge transfer partnership funded through government to understand how we can apply water management and water practices in domestic gardens, particularly around the aspect of how gardeners can better adapt to and mitigate into the climate change. So, in effect, how can gardeners play a role in minimising their footprint, still enjoying the sheer joys of gardening whilst maximising their handprint? Part of that KTP work also, and again on your chairs, is the sustainability strategy for the RHS. Part of that work within that includes water neutral. And again, Ian and Jerry and Mark were instrumental in doing that. So I'll now pass over to Ian, who will give us the lecture, John MacLeod Lecture on water resilience for plants, people, and the planet. Thanks, Ian.
Okay, thank you very much for those kind words, Alistair. And it's a great pleasure and honour to be at RHS Hilltop and to be giving this year's John MacLeod Lecture. I'd like to reiterate Alistair's comments and thank you for turning up. It is so much nicer to be talking to a room of people rather than a screen of little black squares on Zoom. As Alistair said, I'll be talking about water resilience for plants, people and the planet. I'm from Cranfield University. For those of you that haven't heard or don't know of Cranfield University, we're an exclusively postgraduate research-intensive university based in or near Milton Keynes. And water and agri-food are two of the key themes within the university. Within the talk I shall be giving, I'm going to be roaming quite broadly, but talking about sewage, really exciting, energy, vegetables. I might touch on sustainable development goals. And I'll also say a little bit about plants and gardens. But I want to start off thinking about what is a cubic metre of water. Now, literally, a cubic metre of water is 1,000 litres. It's the rain that falls here at Wisley on 1.5 square metres of the ground in an average year. It's the average weekly use of water for one person in the UK. So covering everything that you as an average person would use for drinking, cleaning, flushing your toilets. It's about £1.60 for my local water company for drinking water. So just £1.60. It's the amount of water that a farmer would use to produce around 500 portions of potatoes. So that's quite a lot of meals coming from that 1 cubic metre. It has energy in it, so each of those cubic metres has the greenhouse gas emissions embedded within it, equivalent to driving your car for about a mile. Not insignificant. And it's the amount of water that if you're running a hose pipe or a lawn sprinkler, you might use in just 1 hour. And you might say, well, that's not really important. Yes, it's running a hose pipe for an hour, and that is equivalent to the amount of water I would use in a week. Because we're in a country where we have plenty of water. Our whole cultural identity is framed around water. We live on the blue planet. Our most popular hymn, William Blake's Jerusalem, talks about our green and pleasant land. Some of the best-known cultural works of art, like John Constable's The Hay Wain, features water. Our favourite landscape views and the ones that come out top in surveys always feature water. And we're forever having floods, aren't we? Almost every week through most winters, somewhere's getting flooded. So we're in a country with plenty of water. Why should I worry about my hosepipe running for an hour and using as much water as I would use in an entire week? Well, it all comes down to our climate and its variability in our climate. And a few years ago, Sir James Bevan, the chief executive of the Environment Agency, spoke about us needing to escape the jaws of death. Now, it was a very emotive language, but it was essentially talking about 2 lines intersecting: the trend of water demand and the trend of water availability. And at some point by 2050, those 2 lines would cross. The demand for drinking water would be more than our ability to supply it. And that's expected to come about through 3 main areas: through the climate crisis, climate change, through the fact that we have an increasing population and increasingly sort of water-intensive habits, and an undeniable need to protect the natural environment. We shouldn't be using water at the expense or to the detriment of the environment. So as a consequence of that sort of need to escape the jaws of death, the National Framework for Water Resources was published last year, which really said that if we take no action over the next 25 or so years, then we'll need around 3,000 million extra litres of water per day. Now, if you say that really quickly, it doesn't sound so bad, but that's 3,000 million litres of water every day, extra on top of what we have. The challenges of doing that, or the problems that would raise if we don't change habits and practice, will be phenomenal. 3,000 million litres a day short. And that's coming from all of those things that I mentioned, parts of climate change, population change, environmental protection, and the need for drought resilience. But fortunately, there's a plan. There's a plan to address that problem. And so within that framework, we have on the left, on that dark bar, the additional water needs that we need to find, those 3,000 megalitre or million litres per day. And if we just take the central demand projection there, then it's showing how we can achieve that. We can achieve that, or find those 3,000 million litres a day through investing in infrastructure, so new reservoirs, through drought measures, through leakage reduction, and through water efficiency. Now, we could say, well, actually, fine, that's not our problem, that's the water company's problem. They've got to find that water. They've got to find those savings. But Artesia Consulting, who a number of you, and I'm sure the RHS are very familiar with, did some work looking at the increased water demand in the 2018 drought and what caused the uplift in water use or public water supply use in that 2018 summer drought. Because domestic water use really went up. It went up 20% in metered properties, so those people who are paying for their water on a volumetric basis. It went up 30% in unmetered properties. And they attributed it largely to outdoor water use. Outdoor water use, can say, is a synonym for gardening. It's not exclusively gardening. There are other outdoor water uses. You may have a swimming pool, a jacuzzi, a hot tub. You may be washing your car. But gardening is there. And within those measures to make up for that shortfall, drought measures include temporary use bans. They're what used to be called hosepipe bans. They're not called that anymore, they're temporary use bans. But they're there specifically to address and control garden water use. That's their role. The water efficiency measure is around reducing per capita water consumption from 142 litres per person per day to 110 litres per person per day. And that will be partly, not exclusively, but partly through water metering. So you can see that there are opportunities here for the water companies to target gardeners and garden water use. So there's a problem And there's a challenge, and that challenge for us as gardeners is that when we want water the most is when there is least available. And this graph here shows in the blue line average monthly river flow in the Thames at Hampton Court. I prepared this one. I was doing a talk at Hampton Court Flower Show this year. And the orange line is sunshine hours, which we can think of as an analogue for the water demands of plants. And we can see that peak in the summer when flows in the river are basically at their lowest. So we want the water when water levels in the rivers are low, in our aquifers are low, and when our reservoirs are low. So we have a real challenge there as gardeners. But we have a great opportunity. Because one of the reasons that William Blake talks about our green and pleasant land within Jerusalem is that we're blessed. Well, you might argue we're not blessed, but we're blessed with a climate that lacks rainfall seasonality. I was just talking this morning or this afternoon with a researcher from India, working in Rajasthan. And there they get rainfall for about 2 months of the year. The rest of the year it's phenomenally arid. The challenges of managing water there when you know you've got 10 months without rainfall. Phenomenally challenging. But you look at our rainfall and it lacks seasonality. So whilst we have the seasonality in evapotranspiration, the water demand of plants from those orange lines, looking at those average monthly profiles for here at Wisley and at Harlow Carr, you can see that it's relatively uniform through the year. We get regular rainfall. And that's our really big opportunity as gardeners. So I want to think about a sort of an illustrative water balance of a garden. I'm looking at an average garden with the climate of Wisley. I thought it was appropriate to be here. So on an average garden at Wisley, it's about 72,000 litres of rainfall will fall on that garden in a typical year. 70,000 litres of rainwater. Now, a large proportion of that water will get returned to the atmosphere by evaporation from the soil and from plant surfaces and transpiration from the vegetation. Some will run off. Some will drain through the soil, and some will be held within the soil water. Now, over the course of a year, we have more rainfall than we have evapotranspiration. So we have enough water. But of course, we know as gardeners that the demand for plants of water is not even through the year. So we do have deficits. We have parts of the year when the rainfall isn't enough to meet our plant demands. And we can hope we can make some of that balance from the soil water. But actually, we should be thinking at a larger scale. So if I bring my house in, then a typical house will then use about 11,000 litres of drinking water in their garden to make up that shortfall. Watering the garden with a hose pipe or with a watering can filled with an outside tap, typically about 11,000 litres of water. 11,000 litres of highly treated water that has been pumped, has consumed energy. And that water, that mains water, that 11,000 litres, will have come from somewhere in the environment. It will have come from a river. It will have come from an aquifer. It's water that otherwise could be supporting other environments, other ecology, other species. But we use it in our gardens. But what I would like to see is us as gardeners saying, well, actually, we shouldn't be using that water, that drinking water that's come from the wider environment, the wider water cycle. We should, as gardeners, be managing the water that we receive within the boundaries of our property. The scale of our water balance, the scale of our water cycle should be the scale of our property. So if I bring the rest of my house in, then I can expect about 33,000 litres of rainfall to run off my roofs. The rainfall onto my roof will be more than that, but actually about 33,000 litres of rainwater will come off my roof. 59,000 would typically come off the hard surfaces of my property, off my drive, off my patio, off my garage roof. But what do we do? What do builders do? They make it as easy as possible for that 33,000 litres off the roof and that 59,000 litres off my hard surfaces to go into the drains, into the sewers, be really helping to contribute to downstream flood risk and sewer overflows. But if we think about the water cycle at the scale of our property, we have enough water. And that's even without thinking about the 120,000 litres of drinking water that we bring in for toilet flushing, for drinking, for cleaning, and for washing. Now, there are colleagues of mine at Cranfield Water Science Institute that are really interested in transferring some of their constructed wetlands technologies for treating that grey water, that hand-washing water, the water from your dishwasher, your washing machine, for use in domestic gardens. I'm not going to go down that route. But if we think about actually how much of that 120,000 litres of water that comes into our property could be treated within our property and be available for use, we have plenty of water. So what we should be doing really is doing our best to reduce evaporation, the loss of water from our soils. That's not helping our plants. We should be trying to reduce the runoff from our properties, from our gardens, because that's just losing water at a time of excess and contributing to downstream problems. And we should be striving to not use mains water, not use drinking water, not use highly treated drinking water on our gardens. And so that's my ambition for us as gardeners, to be really saying, this is our water. We should be managing it properly. We should be managing it resiliently to benefit our gardens, to benefit the environment, and to reduce adverse consequences downstream of our gardens. So part of what we've done working with the RHS was start the Mains to Rains pledge. This was a small campaign this year to get gardeners, to encourage gardeners to pledge to do actions that would reduce their need to use mains water. And so be making better use of the rainwater that's available to them and to increase their water resilience. Those of you that went to Chelsea earlier this summer, I hope you saw our Mains to Rains garden in the Discovery Centre. So we have this Mains to Rains pledge that we've been promoting. And the pledge, as we say, to do simple actions. This is not rocket science. This is not changing the ambition, the benefit of gardening. It's doing things like pledging not to water your lawns with drinking water. When we water our lawns from a tap, we should remember we're using drinking water. There are billions of people on this planet without access to the fundamental requirement for life, and we are using it to water our lawns. So pledging to avoid watering your lawn, the sky isn't going to fall in. But you save huge amounts of water. And I think there is a real question, an ethical question really to be asking, is with the water challenges that we face in this country and globally, what are the circumstances, if any, is it justifiable to water lawns? Whether that be drinking water, or whether that be water from rivers and aquifers, we're taking that water at the time of least availability, when there is the greatest stress on the natural environment. And I think there is a real discussion to be had about the appropriateness of irrigating lawns and the value of fine turf. So that's one of the actions that we're encouraging people to pledge. To reduce soil evaporation. Soil evaporation isn't doing a great deal for our gardens. So we're asking people to pledge to use a watering can, okay, rather than a hose pipe. They might still be using that watering can from an outside tap, but for those of you that water with a watering can, you put more attention and thought into your watering than if you use a hose pipe. And let's face it, it's a lot better for you. You get the exercise, you get the wellness benefits of really connecting with your plants. We're asking people to pledge to add mulch, to add organic matter to their soils, to increase the water holding capacity, so that when it does rain, we can store more water in our soils. The soils are the largest reservoir in your garden. We can make it more effective by improving soil health. We've asked people to pledge to use drip trays under their pots. So if there is drainage out when you're watering your pots, you're collecting it and able to reuse it. Or to use self-watering pots, where actually the plant controls the uptake of water. To match the water supply to the water demand. To reduce the runoff, we've asked people to pledge to install, and as I've underlined there, to use a water butt. Installing a water butt and then not using it doesn't achieve much of a benefit. But if you install and use a water butt, because of our climate, our regular rainfall, it's being regularly topped up, that reservoir gets replenished. We've asked the people to think about pledging to put in permeable paving, to depave part of their gardens to make space for plants, consistent with the Greening Grey Britain campaign, if it's still called that. So these are not challenging things to do. And that's part of the point. These are easy actions that gardeners can do. But so far, the pledges that people have made through the Mains to Rains website come to about 11 million litres of water a year. 11 million litres of water a year is quite a lot of water. And it's still gardening. It's still doing good gardening. And when we had our Mains to Rains garden at Chelsea, that was one of the things we really wanted to show, that good water management and water resilience in gardens is not at the expense of gardening. It's not at the expense of garden quality. It's just doing the basics well. And those small actions really scale up. Now, that 11 million litres of water saving that people have pledged to do is actually only from about 1,000 gardeners. Think how many members the RHS has. Think how many gardeners there are. Something like 30 million gardeners. If 1,000 gardeners pledging will save 11 million litres, just think what gardeners can do. Small actions really can scale up to major benefits. But I don't want to say it's all our responsibility as gardeners to solve, so to speak, the water crisis, to improve water management. There are many more players in this space who ought to be contributing to this. Both the horticultural and landscape industry and government developers and planners. We should be building in ways that reduce runoff in houses. Shouldn't be left to us as gardeners to retrofit things. It should be there in new builds. So the picture on the top left, I hope you recognise, is Rachel de Tame at Chelsea this year on her BBC coverage, talking about the permeable paving that we had displayed. That grey paving with the blue arrow is rock hard. It's like asphalt or tarmac, but it's bound with resin, it's permeable, the water goes through. It doesn't run off into the drains. Why aren't we seeing that more? Soakaways. Soakaways used to be a standard way of dealing with roof drainage. Your roof runoff would go down into the soakaway and soak into the ground, recharging our aquifers, potentially providing water into our gardens. Becoming much less common, it's easier to put the water into the drains. And then at the larger scale, the picture on the left, showing a permavoid system. These black crates at the bottom here, which underlie the road, collect the runoff in a subsurface reservoir and release it slowly. So the scale that we can put in. And in fact, if any of you have been, well, you will have been because you're here. If you've been to, you obviously will recognize the building. It's where we are. But this is the learning garden. I'm not going to point because I've got a terrible sense of direction. Okay, it's that way. This is the learning garden. And it has one of those systems. It has a permavoid system. which is taking the runoff off the roof. It's going into this subsurface system that underlies the paving and the beds. And that stored water is then being wicked up through capillary rise to sub-irrigate the plants. So the learning garden is being completely irrigated through the summer by the rainfall. It's a technology that we can put into our gardens. It's a technology that could go into new builds to provide the runoff attenuation that we need, helping keeping water in our gardens, as well as releasing it slowly, but providing that storage of water. So that was about the sort of developers and builders. When we buy plants, they've been grown somewhere. And our growers, our garden centres and our retailers, they use water in the production of plants, obviously. They're a small overall user of water. According to the Horticultural Trade Association, they use just 0.2% of total UK water use. That sounds quite a small amount. It's less than agriculture, less than irrigated agriculture. But what they omit to saying is that really that 0.2% isn't spread evenly through the year because of our climate, because of the seasonality of plant growth. It's seasonal. In the summer, it will be more than 0.2%, I'm sure. And they're a high user of mains water. But water's critical to their businesses. The Horticultural Trade Association survey reckoned that 50% of businesses suggested that having water not available in the summer would affect their business survival. So water is critical to the business of growing plants. But then when we look at these photographs at the bottom from fact sheets produced for the sector, what do we see? It doesn't show up quite so well. But on the photo on the right, this area here is a slightly different colour. It's being irrigated. The photo on the left, we can see large amounts of runoff. Water that is not meeting the plant's needs. And this quote at the bottom, again from the fact sheet for the sector, says it's usual to get a little run through, so drainage out of the containers, unless insufficient irrigation is being applied. There's a message there in the words and in the pictures that wastage is the norm. Wastage is acceptable. Wastage is a normal part of production. Doesn't need to be. So I really think they need, as a sector, to be doing more. They need to be measuring, monitoring, and analysing water use. Their recent survey for the Horticultural Trade Association had very poor response rate. And one of the suggestions that was caused was because one of the early questions was about how much water businesses used. And they didn't necessarily know that or have easy access to it. So saving water is about measuring, monitoring and analysing water use. It's about staff training, increasing their capacity to manage water well. It's about scheduling irrigation to match the needs of the plant. Why wouldn't you do that? And optimising the way that you irrigate so you minimise watering where there's no plants. And then finally, there's rainwater harvesting. And one of the things that we've done recently at Cranfield, for example, is produce a rainwater harvesting tool for soft fruit growers so they can understand the business case and the environmental case for rainwater harvesting to reduce that use and reliance on mains water. Now, when we want to buy a plant, we can choose our plants in multiple ways, can't we? The RHS produces some fantastic tools to help you choose appropriate plants, that really help you choose the right plant for the right place, to deliver growing success. I think these are fantastic. Really good. We've got moisture. We've got water there. It's there to help guide you. But then when we go to a garden centre, and I'll just say that these photos are RHS garden centres, but I'm not picking on the RHS, I'm just using it as an example. But when we go to the garden centre at Wisley, and I want to choose my plants for my garden, the layout of garden centres is not really helping the customer choose the right plant for their place. It's not helping the staff give the information to the customer. What am I faced with? I'm faced with A to Zs. It's all about the plant, not the place. It's not about helping and empowering the staff and the customer to choose a plant that will thrive in the conditions that I have. But at least if my plant dies, I've got a 5-year guarantee. Although if you read the small print, if you've underwatered, the guarantee doesn't apply. So buy your plant and overwater it, then you're all... I shouldn't say that. But I think we have the tools to help us choose our plants for the right place, but we're not necessarily laying out our garden centres to really help in that way. And every plant that we buy that's unsuitable for our conditions, if it dies, we've lost the water that's embedded in its production. And if we're managing to keep it alive in unsuitable conditions, we're probably using water that we don't need to. So the final thing I want to touch on is just going broader now into the sort of bigger picture. I'm sure we all here like eating our fruit and vegetables. The fruit and vegetables that we consume in the UK are associated with the use of 500 million cubic meters a year of fresh water. So when you go to your supermarket and you're looking at the offerings that are there, aggregated up 500 million cubic meters a year of fresh water, that's river water, reservoir water, groundwater, have been used in the production of those fruit and vegetables. And that's a figure from my colleague Tim Hess and ex-colleague Chloe Sutcliffe, who now works for the RHS. But the map at the bottom is a map of water scarcity, showing the number of months in which the water scarcity metric is more than 100%. What that means is the number of months in which the availability of fresh water is less than the demands for that fresh water, for people and for the environment. So the darker the colours, the more months of water scarcity, the more months in which more water is being demanded than is available. Now, of that 500 million cubic metres of fresh water per year that is used, to produce our fruit and veg. Just 13% of that 500 million cubic meters is UK water. The other 87% is water from elsewhere. And where's it coming from? It's coming from Spain, South Africa, Morocco, Peru, Chile, Israel, Egypt. Look at the colours in the areas where we're sourcing our fruit and vegetables. They're coming from areas with genuine water supply challenges. Now, we can't replace all of that, obviously, because of our climate and because of the seasonality of our climate. But I think what we can say is that if we're using rainwater, you've done your mains to rains pledges, and you're using rainwater to grow fruit, vegetables, or ornamental flowers at home, you are helping to alleviate water scarcity in other parts of the world. And you're not just alleviating water scarcity, you're saving food miles, you're saving energy, you're saving greenhouse gas emissions. So not just gardening, but growing, home production, allotments, gardens, balconies, anything we do to grow our own fruit, vegetables, and ornamentals using mains water is helping the water challenges and the water SDGs. So just to wrap up, because I'm conscious I'm coming to my time limit, improving water management and developing water resilience in our gardens and outdoor spaces is not rocket science. It's just about doing the basics of gardening well and not relying on the quick fix of turning on a mains tap. I really think we should be aiming to have minimal mains water usage in our gardens and outdoor spaces. We should be aiming to manage our outdoor spaces for maximum groundwater recharge and reduced runoff, to build larger scale water resilience. I genuinely don't think this involves sacrificing the quality of our gardens, but I do think we need a change in mindset away from focusing on often the aesthetics of the plant rather than the broader ecosystem services and resource needs of the plant. So not focusing on I want to grow the plant, but thinking about the plant, the place, the many benefits that it delivers, both to the environment, to our well-being, to pollinators, to native wildlife, and the resource needs for those plants. It's not just about gardeners doing it. There is a broader agenda here that needs to be put in place to achieve that. But really what I think is important is that through our actions and our behaviors and our changes, we can really show that gardens and gardeners are actually part of the solution to the challenges of water scarcity and flooding, rather than at the moment being seen as part of the problem. You know, let's make no bones about it. Gardeners are seen as part of the problem in dry weather. We don't need to be. We have the tools available to actually be part of the solution through the Mains to Rains pledge. So I would ask you to please, when you have a few minutes, go to Mains to Rains, www.mainstorains.uk, and pledge to get those numbers up, to show that these actions do scale up. And I'd just like to finally thank the RHS for inviting me, to thank the RHS and UK Research and Innovation, who funded the Knowledge Transfer Partnership that Alistair mentioned, To thank SEL Environmental, who helped or installed the permavoid system in the Learning Garden. Dave Green Gardens, and Dave Green himself, who designed our mains terrains display at Chelsea. I hope you saw it. It was beautiful. And then finally to thank my colleague Jerry Knox, Janet Manning, Mark Gush and Alistair for all of the useful collaborations over the past 3 years. Thank you very much.
So, thank you very much, Ian. That's been really great. And I think, again, in relation to the RHS working on trying to raise its bar in relation to doing evidence-based science through the Knowledge Transfer Partnership and working with collaborators in the country, such as Cranfield University, has been really beneficial. So we are going to appoint, because now the Knowledge Transfer Partnership is completed, we're going to appoint a water scientist in the next year to continue this work so that we can make sure that we can provide the very best information and knowledge and better understand more about the plants elements that we have. So thanks very much. Now, over to questions. We have people here, I think students have said that they'll help in relation to roaming microphones. So if anyone wants to put their hands up and have questions for Ian, please.
Yeah, without the microphone.
Okay.
Ian, where would you see boreholes in terms of water use? You were talking about using drinking water, but a borehole isn't drinking water. Where do you see that?
You're right, we can, in theory, or in practice, I suppose, water our gardens using borehole water. It does have some advantages because you are taking the water close to its point of use. So a lot of the energy that's used in providing drinking water is actually pumping costs to move water around the country. But at the end of the day, even if you are taking water from the borehole, you are taking that water from the environment. There is an opportunity cost, in essence, of taking that water that otherwise could be supporting river flows, wetlands, etc. And, as I showed, we tend to use most water when water levels are at their lowest. So I don't want to say don't garden, but really the resource that we have available and which has no opportunity cost, that imposes no burden on the environment, is using rainwater.
Just to add, in relation to that, so in fact, just last year, I've had 3 individuals who have dug boreholes and then looked at the quality of the water that they have. And often boreholes do kick up a lot of quality issues in relation to the water that you provide. And of all those 3 boreholes that I provided advice to, all of it was you're going to have to dilute them down with mains water because the water that you've got is not of a good quality. It's high in salts. You have elements of risks of high in chemicals depending on what's in the areas of those. And even when I was working at Eden Project in the nursery there, it was high in iron. So we had a lot of clogging of irrigation systems. So boreholes often bring out some other complications that you can do. And in the end, I think the first protocol I would say is collect where you can from the sky in that element, and you'll get a much better quality of water than you would do if you get from the ground. It is still possible, though. There are many places that have boreholes with good quality water and use it.
But fundamentally, that groundwater is what provides the base flow or provides the flows in rivers during the summer. And if we are taking that from our boreholes, we are essentially reducing river flows to a greater or lesser extent. So if we're going to use that water, assuming it's suitable, we should be using it with the maximum efficiency and not wasting it.
Hi, thank you for an intriguing talk. About 5 years ago, I extended my family home, and the planning regulations required me to change the drainage from the house roof to a soakaway in the garden and single flush toilets to dual flush toilets, so both things to deal with water issues. In the 5 years since that extension was built, I've had regular waterlogging problems in my back garden, which seem to be linked to having a soakaway there. And of course, dual flush toilets have proved to be not such a water-saving device as they were originally thought because of all the mechanical problems. Do you think that some of the solutions that planning authorities are putting in place are perhaps a little naive in their simplicity? There's too much of a one solution fits all.
That's a tricky question, because obviously, you know, a soakaway, in the example of your soakaway, it should be designed to function given your ground conditions and the ease with which water can drain through your substrate. So the fact that it's not working suggests actually perhaps it wasn't designed appropriately. But I shall risk saying it, you know, having that wetness can be an opportunity. Rain gardens, you know, wetland planting. Nothing in life rarely is completely one size fits all. And I think in a way that's part of the reason that, you know, some of the sort of the technical solutions don't tend to be or aren't always adopted, like permeable paving, like soakaways, etc., because it's easier just to plumb things in. And certainly one of the things we did in the KTP, for example, was, or Janet Manning did as part of the KTP, was a hanging basket trial that you may have read about in the RHS publications, looking at a range of different ways of watering. And it was certainly the case there that there were real challenges in getting some of the more automated systems to work appropriately in a way that met the plant demand without under or overwatering. Technology is not always the answer, which is partly why the Mains to Rains pledges, which you're all going to look at after this talk, are not relying on technological solutions.
Picking up on that theme, all the things you said about exploiting what you get on your property is fine for designing in, maybe for new builds, but as we know, there are far fewer new builds than the country needs, but there are millions and millions of properties that could perhaps do with a retrofit. Now, my concern there, for example, if I was to say, yes, I wanted to pick up on one of your pledge areas, but really, I'd be looking for a source that was technically capable, if you like a landscape gardener, but has focused on this, to say, come into this property and tell me all of the things that could be done and give me a budget for doing them without necessarily pushing any one particular brand of solution. Now, is that something the RHS can underpin or think about, rather than, if you like, still keeping up your research going forward for new things, but even as we speak today, surely there would be good to actually have a source for that.
So I think, I mean, this is linked very much to the other document that's on your thing, which is the Ornamental Roundtable, Horticultural Roundtable Group, which is a collective of the industry coming together to look at solutions. And I think, so my brother, he did a YTS, he was a Sparky, he got 40 quid a year, he's now teaching in a college doing renewable energy in Scotland. And we do need that kind of apprenticeship scheme in relation to retrofitting buildings, as similar as towards to retrofitting where we are now with the different types of heating systems and others. And I think there is a need going forward to have that training of new technicians that can come in and look at those and weave that within the Society of Garden Designs and others that will come in and have those elements to deal with both adaptation and mitigation. I think we can provide the information, whether we go a step further and go in and create a whole business around going in and retrofitting. And I know how difficult it is. I am quite practical. I can plaster, I can do things, but trying to put a water butt onto my house was actually very, very tight. Which pipe fits which elements? There's about 13 different types of pipes that you can put in. So it isn't straightforward for people to do that. And again, the way that water lies. So I've put soak away in, but again, what kind of soak away? How do you do it? So it is quite a technical skill in order to do that. So it is a really good idea. And I think, we need to do more about providing the evidence base, but also having a new green industry that puts the green plants and others into that green industry other than just solar panels, retrofitting things. It's all been focused on the house. This is a really good point that we need to develop beyond the house to say that there are also carbon benefits to doing these things within your house. Yes, so you have that element of quality.
One thing I just wanted to add, though, is I deliberately said we should not use mains water. We should minimise it, because there are plenty of properties, for example, apartments, where they're not going to be able to store rainwater. We still want them to be gardening, but they should be minimising. It's not just about gardens and houses.
Peter.
You've talked a lot about your own work, obviously, but are there examples from other countries? You've talked about your own work, obviously, but are there examples from other countries that we should be looking at as well? I don't know, I'm not an expert, but there are more extreme environments, and in Germany, I understand they have laws about permeable surfaces.
I'm sure there's plenty to learn in many countries, whether that be on some of the technologies around irrigation, the dealing with extreme events. We were talking earlier that as a country we're not great at dealing with extreme events compared to other countries. Absolutely, there's plenty of examples out there that we can draw upon, and we do in practice.
So our head, he's not new anymore, he's been here for a number of years, but the head of environmental horticultural science is Mark Gush. Where are you, Mark? He's there just being double act of AV person at the moment because the AV person had COVID. So, but he originated from South Africa, so has involved some of those things. And I think some of the other technology, Australia are very much ahead in relation to water-wise gardening. But I think if you look across the country, there are some really key areas of research that aren't being done internationally. And one is the thing that Ian talked about, which is how do we reuse our grey water better and understanding that. So I think there's some science work they're doing to that. And also in relation to when you look at these subsystems now, I know Sheffield University are doing a little bit, but at the moment, if we do put subsystems in at the moment, the choice of plants isn't based on any evidence about how quickly they're sucking the water out. It's just it is a bit like that in relation to tolerance of it. So can we look towards breeding and developing plants that can actually take water out when you need it in winter, which is not a deciduous tree, it's an evergreen tree or shrub or plant, which one, maybe grasses, can remove that water quicker and play part of that role. So again, I think going forward with Cranfield, some of those things will be things that we will hopefully look towards doing as part of PhDs to have a better understanding so we can give members advice. I think we're there for the for the questions. But, just one more, Nick.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting talk. I just wanted to make one comment, and that is that the two photographs you showed of the horticultural commercial industry is, I think, a very poor representation of what actually goes on in professional horticulture. There are many most nurseries I know are not that antiquated, wasting water through sprinkler irrigations. There's a lot of investment in reservoirs, good runoff, drip irrigation, and so on. So you may comment on that. The other point I wanted to make was, you haven't mentioned the price of water. If you ever wanted to reduce wastage, you have to put the price up of the commodity. That applies to food, water, and basic needs. And you haven't mentioned that, and why shouldn't we be contemplating levying extra tax on water, utilizing it in new building projects and so on? It's also a political issue, and I think we need to come to terms with that as well. Thank you.
So I did mention water price right at the beginning, and I think water is cheap. And you're definitely right, water pricing is a political issue. Clearly it's fundamental to people, and tiered pricing has been raised in the past, but it's quite challenging. I don't dispute that there is good practice in the horticultural sector. Really what I was pointing out is those were illustrations and quotes from current guidance to the sector. And for me, they shouldn't be showing those sorts of examples in guidance documents from AHDB. You know, overhead sprinklers, which were being shown there, are still quite widespread. They're not the most efficient way, and I would absolutely agree. From the work that we do with agriculture, farmers pay for water, and if you're having to pay for your own reservoir installation, water is not cheap. It's a very significant business cost, and they do use water wisely. But you're right, for growing, for many of us using water is too cheap.
I think just to add to that, certainly, Nick, I've seen your operations, and I've seen the past sort of 5 years, been onto sites where they absolutely have reservoirs and they collect their water, and they're very effective and efficient. I think what is important, and I think has been a bit unfortunate in relation to the government funding aspect, is that the government funding aspect just recently that's come out has all been about improving the technology of delivery, which is needed as well, but actually there's still a lot of nurseries that could benefit from storage facilities and collection for growing. So I think that there is definite scope that industry can also help with those aspects, and want to. I think the industry are very positive in what they want to achieve, and the water roadmap is actually a very good example of that, of getting together. So there has been a lot done, and often they get negative elements linked to those things. So I think it's really important. The nursery I went to 2 weeks ago was phenomenal. Captured every bit of water on its hard standing into reservoirs and reused it, and was very conscientious about that. But every drop is going to count, so we need support from both industry, government, and gardeners to make this difference. And there are good and bad practices throughout any industry in every world. Right, so moving on. So thank you very much, Ian. I want to now introduce you to David Ray, who's going to introduce the Marsh Charitable Trust Award. Dr. David Ray was the former curator of and director of horticulture at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Edinburgh, and we're really lucky to have him both on the RHS Council, but also on Science Committee, helping to support and steer both our scientific work, but also the work we do in horticulture. So, David, over to you.
double act. Well, first of all, Ian, thank you very much. What an important topic and great coverage. The Marsh Charitable Trust Award for Horticultural Science recognises a horticultural science PhD student who has made exceptional progress in their studies, and it aims to enable a student to undertake an activity which will help their career develop. But to tell you more about the Trust, I'd like to invite John MacLeod, who is one of the Trust's ambassadors, to explain a little bit more about the history and what the Trust is all about.
Thank you, David. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to be here. Thank you, Alistair. It's a great privilege to be here. Wisley is a place that I've visited over many years, but not recently, and I've seen some changes. But what goes on here is hugely important. The Marsh Charitable Trust was founded in 1981 as a grant-making body by Brian Marsh. It's all in the name. Over the past 30 years, the Trust has developed an award scheme to provide recognition to those who work to improve the world we live in. The recipients of Marsh Awards are always people who have made a difference by selflessly contributing their efforts to the causes that they believe in. The awards run in partnership with the Royal Horticultural Society, form part of a larger scheme of over 100 awards that the Trust runs in partnership with external organisations spanning the areas of heritage, social welfare, the arts and conservation. The environment features very strongly, but other activities include modern slavery and human trafficking, addiction, the built-in heritage, the arts, international diplomacy and social support. One award that I was involved in last week virtually was to an individual, Ahmed Nima, who has been working in Iraq to try and revive people's understanding of the importance of the Iraqi marshes that were destroyed by Saddam Hussein, which there was only a very small remnant left. And I felt that had some sort of resonance for what we're hearing today. We have to value our water resources and the systems that supply them. So the Marsh Award for Horticultural Society, I should also say that rather illustrates the point that the award winners become part of a wide diaspora, a family of people all making a difference. The Marsh Award for Horticultural Science has been presented since 2011 and recognises the work and encourages new postgraduate scientists to develop careers in horticultural science. This year, as in previous years, the Society is recognising 2 postgraduate scientists for their outstanding work. Now, I think I go back to you, David, and we do some clever stuff, juggling a lot of paper.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. First of all, I'd just like to say that the RHS, indeed the whole horticulture industry, is immensely grateful to the Trust for the support in really encouraging new, young, enthusiastic research workers into horticulture. It's so, so important. We're lucky this year we have 2 equal top prizes. We really couldn't separate them apart. They were both very, very good. They're both excellent research, but they both hope to have practical outcomes. And the only thing that really links them is they're both about fruit. The first recipient is, and I'll read out both these awards because first, and then invite them both up together because, as I say, this is a first equal prize, not first and second, they're first equal. Sindhanaya Godfrey was Harper Adams University, and the title of her project is Resistance and Susceptibility in Interactions Between Apples and Woolly Aphids, and her project started in September 2019. Woolly apple aphid is thought to be native to North America, where it's able to alternate its life cycle on American elm. Outside of its native distribution, it is generally asexually reproducing, giving rise to clonal populations which build up on apple trees, causing serious infestations. You can tell me nothing. I've got it in one of my apples, and it's causing serious problems and very difficult to get rid of. It's poorly understood, though, in the UK, and this project is looking at the genetic structure of woolly apple aphid populations, as well as using molecular methods to locate the genes for resistance to the aphid in the host. The good news is that there are apple rootstocks currently known to be resistant to woolly apple aphid. But the bad news is that there are reports that the aphids are beginning to become resistant and to colonize the trees. Seasonality's work has shown an unexpected amount of genetic diversity in UK populations, suggesting that sexual reproduction might be occurring, and she's made good progress with refining existing gene maps of a resistant locus and is currently exploring additional loci, as well as studying crab apples, also known to be resistant. The development of new resistant rootstocks by traditional methods can take up to 25 years. So identifying the genes for resistance has potential to speed the process up considerably. So as I said, good research, but with real practical outcomes. The second first top recipient is Sophie Reed from the University of Reading, and her title is Towards a Year-Round Production of UK Strawberries. And her project started in October 2019. UK production of strawberries has increased by an astonishing 277% between 2008 and 2018, no doubt using a lot of water as well, reflecting its growing popularity as a fruit. And although the period when strawberries can be harvested has increased from 6 weeks to 9 months, the continual demand for the fruit during the winter has led to a 70% increase in strawberry imports. To reduce imports and improve the sustainable production of the crop in the UK by making it possible to produce strawberries all the year round is a key aim of this project. Sophie's research has involved conducting experiments to study the effects of temperature, day length, and carbon dioxide concentration on strawberry growth, both separately and in combination in a glasshouse setting. Her results so far are already producing insights into the physiological basis for producing high-quality fruit under winter conditions, but also indicating practical solutions that can be used by growers to extend the growing season. Sorry about that. So could I ask now Sophie and Seasonality to come forward and receive your awards from John Bennett.
Congratulations, Sophie. The award consists of a certificate and a modest cheque to support your research. So now, are you happy with what we've got here?
Absolutely perfect. Don't do the handshake.
Don't do the handshake.
I don't think we're allowed to. Perfect. Brilliant. I'll grab you for a couple of extra seconds.
And Seasonality. Same award, a certificate, and a modest cheque to help with your research. Congratulations. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you again to the Trust for your support. We really do appreciate it. And many, many congratulations to both recipients. Well done indeed. Alistair, do you want to say a few final words?
So, it is, I think there's very few awards for horticultural scientists, and so those two awards are really, it really makes me proud. So thank you for supporting us, because I think, and supporting the future students, because not only does that award give them a bit of money to do other further research or do a conference or other things, but what it also does is it gives a recognition of a quality, because that goes through our science committee and look through and also check and then put that forward, which then helps certainly these horticulturalists in relation to their career by having it on their CV and getting jobs which we need, because there is definitely a need to fill more jobs in relation to horticultural science so that we continue to combat the items such as climate change, the environmental risks that we have and the elements linked to health. And we can do that through good horticultural science, and we need to invest more in horticultural science so that we can help to deal with the challenges that face us, but also so that we can all continue to just really enjoy the joy of gardening. So On that note, we do have wine and drinks here, so please feel free to mingle and chat. I think the speaker's going to be around so you can ask him the questions, those that you didn't. Thank you very much for coming. It's been such a pleasure to have this lecture again with physical people in the room and questions. So thank you very much, and please enjoy the rest of the evening.